Good morning from the Freedom of Information and Privacy Association. I'm Patrick Farnsworth, and this is your Access and Privacy Online News Summary for Saturday, December 20th. As we close out our final news summary of 2025, this week's stories bring together a familiar set of themes: how access to information exposes public risk, how governments are reshaping decision-making behind closed doors, and how emerging technologies, from artificial intelligence to biometric surveillance, are testing the limits of privacy law around the world. We'll begin with national reporting shaped by access to information requests, then move through local journalism initiative stories on accountability, spending, and environmental risk. From there, we turn to growing debates over Canadian AI data centers, before closing with international access to information battles and a condensed look at the Trump-era ripple effects across U.S. institutions. And a quick reminder, Bill C-4 is now at first reading in the Senate. It's not too late to contact committee members or your member of parliament. We hope many of our listeners would agree. Especially this time of year, political parties shouldn't be allowed to put Canadians on secret naughty lists. Be sure to follow the show notes to let them know. It's our last summary of the year, so let's dive in. We begin with two stories from LJI reporter Natasha Belowski at Canada's National Observer. To start, we look at a warning about Canada's food system and what internal documents reveal about its fragility. The Canadian Food Inspection Agency doubts it could adequately protect the food supply if Canada faced multiple concurrent emergencies, such as disease outbreaks or large-scale recalls. That warning comes from a 2024 to 2027 corporate risk assessment obtained through an access to information request, which flags aging infrastructure, staffing pressures, and nearly $200 million in deferred maintenance. Climate change is compounding those risks, increasing the likelihood of zoonotic disease and pest outbreaks. At the same time, Ottawa is pushing public service cuts. This year alone, the agency has dealt with more unusual simultaneous issues, including a salmonella crisis in Iranian pistachios that required extensive testing and import limits, and a months-long battle to cull a herd of ostriches in BC, which culminated in a lengthy, police-protected takeover of the farm. Another factor is Trump cutting staff essential for protecting the U.S. food supply. And because Canada relies heavily on American farmers and processors for its food supply, those cuts create knock-on effects on Canada's food safety. Experts warn the combination of rising threats and shrinking capacity is dangerous, particularly as Canada integrates AI systems into food inspection without stable baseline funding. Next, Belowski reports that Ottawa is facing new questions about the line between public service and private influence. Documents obtained through access requests show the federal government adopted and branded a proposal from the tech-backed group Build Canada, embedding 50 corporate executives into senior government roles to accelerate AI adoption. Build Canada was founded last winter with backing from a slew of prominent tech CEOs, including Daniel Debow, co-founder of Ripple and an ex-Shopify vice president. The memo calls for the government to establish a dedicated program office within the Privy Council office that can actively recruit from Canadian corporations and streamline the hiring process by expediting security clearances, bypassing standard HR procedures. Unions and watchdogs warn the program creates conflicts of interest, morale damage, and, critically, exposure of Canadians' data to private sector actors. While supporters frame the initiative as innovation-focused expertise sharing, critics argue the redacted risk assessments leave the public unable to evaluate how data protection, ethics, or accountability will actually be enforced. Turning to defense spending, newly released records by the Canadian press show how Ottawa's messaging has dramatically shifted. In the report, Defense Minister David McGuinty is now confident Canada will hit NATO's 2% spending target, a sharp reversal from documents obtained through access requests just a year ago, which showed officials privately conceding Canada might never meet the mark. Prime Minister Mark Carney announced in June his government would meet the target this year, then later that month committed Canada to reaching 5% by 2035. NATO projections suggest Canada is on track to spend some $633 billion on defense this fiscal year. The 2025 budget claims the 1.5% target will be easily met through anticipated provincial and municipal spending. meaning Ottawa only really needs to worry about the remaining 3.5%. While billions are now earmarked, analysts caution that opaque accounting, departmental bottlenecks, and creative definitions of defense-adjacent spending leave Canadians with limited visibility into whether commitments are real or simply political signaling. Next, to major infrastructure and how access requests shape public understanding. The first leg of Canada's proposed high-speed rail network will connect Montreal and Ottawa, according to Transport Canada. Documents obtained by the Canadian press through access to information requests show that officials deliberately delayed making that decision public to avoid backlash from municipalities left off the first phase. The founder of the advocacy group for the high-speed railway said it makes sense to start with the Ottawa-Montreal segment, which he said is the easiest part of the route. The project, estimated at up to $90 billion, will now enter public consultations, highlighting once again how access laws often reveal the real decision-making timeline long after public announcements. The federal government has not made a final decision approving funding for the entire rail line. The railway is expected to go from Ontario to Quebec, and the transport minister has called it a generational investment that will shape the Canadian economy for decades to come with lasting benefits. And finally, in our national segment, a case with major implications for Canadian privacy law. The World Anti-Doping Agency, headquartered in Montreal, has asked the federal court to block an investigation by Privacy Commissioner Philippe Dufresne into how the agency handles athletes' biological data. The commissioner is examining whether sensitive personal information was shared internationally and potentially used for sex-based eligibility decisions without knowledge or consent. WADA argues the privacy watchdog lacks jurisdiction. The case now puts a spotlight on how Canadian privacy law applies to powerful international organizations operating on Canadian soil, and whether global governance bodies can shield themselves from domestic oversight. A spokesman for Dufresne's office says the commissioner's investigation is ongoing, and, as the matter is before the court, it has no further comment. And now we turn to more local journalism initiative reporting, where access to information continues to surface accountability gaps at the local level. LGI reporter Brock Weir at the Auroran reports that councillors in Aurora, Ontario are pushing back against efforts to rewrite the town's procedural bylaw to align with strong mayor powers. Strong mayor powers are now enabled through changes in the Ontario Municipal Act. They allow mayors to create and dissolve committees where all members are council members and assign their functions, enables veto for certain bylaws, and empowers mayors to direct staff to do certain things related to their additional powers and duties. Opponents argue that embedding those powers now risks locking in a governance model voters may soon reject. Supporters counter that failing to align bylaws with provincial law creates confusion and undermines transparency. They also point out council does not currently have a procedural bylaw in line with the most recent changes to Ontario's Municipal Act, including the introduction of strong mayor powers. At the heart of the debate is a familiar tension: consensus-driven decision-making through democratic processes versus the ability of an individual to rule autocratically, and how procedural rules shape public access and participation. Meanwhile, in Niagara, access requests reveal direct political interference. LJI reporter Ed Smith at The Pointer reports that a political staffer in Ontario's Environment Ministry directed officials to stop responding to questions about a toxic former GM site in St. Catharines. Political staff who serve elected officials are not supposed to interfere with the policy work and accountability responsibilities that bureaucrats who serve the public are expected to uphold. Emails obtained through Freedom of Information requests show staff were actively preparing responses about a malfunctioning filtration system until a 5-word directive shut the process down. Quote, "Let's close this request," end quote. The result: residents were left without critical information about environmental and public health risks, reinforcing concerns about political offices obstructing lawful access processes. The Freedom of Information request was filed after 2 weeks of silence, where applicants had already agreed to an extension to the deadline that had been requested previously. The request was seeking internal communications to determine what communication was happening behind the scenes in reaction to the questions. And staying with The Pointer, access requests also shed light on municipal spending abroad. LGI reporters Mohammed Hamza and Joel Widnebel detail how Brampton taxpayers paid more than $20,000 for a counselor-led overseas trip, despite unreadable receipts, missing itineraries, and heavy redactions in the records provided. The documents obtained through a Freedom of Information request revealed trips to Taiwan, Brazil, India, Pakistan, Germany, Portugal, and the United States, without finding any tangible benefit for spending taxpayer dollars. Basic travel details were withheld under questionable exemptions, raising concerns about compliance with Ontario's municipal access law, and leaving residents unable to access whether the trip delivered any public benefit at all. Typically, the responsibility for securing foreign investment and building global economic partnerships falls to provincial and federal governments, while local municipalities occasionally participate in much smaller-scale trade missions. We now shift to privacy-focused LJI reporting, where AI governance and data infrastructure are becoming frontline public issues. LJI reporter Wayne Doyle at Barrie Today reports that Oromandante Township has adopted a draft AI policy designed to protect personal and confidential information while allowing limited administrative use. The policy emphasizes human oversight, cybersecurity safeguards, and transparency, but officials acknowledge the framework will need constant revision as AI tools evolve faster than municipal governance structures. AI will be banned during decision-making that impacts an individual, creating products during a sensitive situation, and in the creation of fake images, audio, video, or other material that could be mistakenly interpreted by someone to be real. It can be used automating and streamlining repetitive administrative tasks, brainstorming initial document draft ideas, coding, as well as improving and automating service delivery response, and more. Turning to Manitoba, a much larger AI proposal is taking shape. LJI reporter Brenda Sawatsky at the Niverville Citizen reports that a Nevada-based firm plans to build Manitoba's first major AI data center near Ile-des-Chênes. Proponents frame the project as a boost to digital sovereignty and privacy by keeping data under Canadian law. Critics, however, warn about energy consumption, water use, and secrecy, noting that large data centers often operate under confidentiality agreements that limit public oversight. A second major AI data center, dubbed the Maritime Project, is in the works as well, presumably somewhere along the East Coast. Helping their odds of success is the provincial government's recent endorsement of Manitoba-based data storage infrastructure initiatives. And in Alberta, enthusiasm is colliding with concern. LJI reporter Natasha Belowski at Canada's National Observer reports that some rural municipalities see AI data centers as the second coming of oil, while others fear long-term environmental costs, water depletion, and another boom and bust cycle. Access to information documents show Alberta is prioritizing gas-powered data centers, while neighboring provinces take a more cautious approach, raising questions about climate impact, transparency, and who ultimately bears the cleanup costs. Alberta is introducing new legislation to prioritize data center applications that can generate their own power, rather than drawing on the existing grid capacity. The creation of new natural gas generating stations that would fuel data center growth fits neatly with existing government priorities. While Alberta is welcoming any and all data center development, BC is being more selective about the type of projects it will accept. Alberta is willing to quickly add new gas generation to the grid to keep up with AI data center demands, but BC's electricity is about 98% renewable. And now to international stories where access, privacy, and accountability are under strain worldwide. In Japan, the Oscar-nominated documentary, Black Box Diaries, finally premiered domestically after long delays tied to legal disputes over source privacy and consent. The film highlights the tension between public interest journalism and individual privacy rights, particularly in societies where sexual assault remains deeply stigmatized. In 2024, the director, Shiori Ito, faced a legal dispute with the lawyers who defended her in her sexual assault case. They allege that she undermined the privacy of key sources. In February, Ito acknowledged she used some of the content without getting consent and apologized, promising to edit the film to ensure those people are not identified in future screenings. She has since altered voices of hotel staff, a police investigator, and others shown in the film. In Australia, Reddit has launched a court challenge against the country's new law banning children under 16 from social media. The company argues the law forces intrusive age verification, creating new privacy risks for adults and minors alike, while raising constitutional questions about political expression. Despite the court challenge, Reddit said it would comply with the law and would continue to engage with e-safety. Prime Minister Anthony Albanese's government declined to comment on the merits of Reddit's challenge. Reddit, Facebook, Instagram, Kik, Snapchat, Threads, TikTok, X, YouTube, and Twitch face fines of up to 4.5 million Australian dollars if they fail to take reasonable steps to remove the accounts of Australian children younger than 16. It is important to note that as part of these measures and for privacy reasons, the platforms also cannot compel users to provide government-issued identification. From the United States, an Associated Press investigation reveals how U.S.-developed surveillance technology has enabled China to track dissidents and former officials across borders, monitoring communications, pressuring families, and undermining asylum protections. A retired Chinese official was put on a fugitive list after exposing the inner workings of local Chinese politics, causing him to flee to the United States, but he has continued to be surveilled. His communications and movements have been tracked, and more than 40 of his friends and family, including his pregnant daughter, in China have been identified and detained, sometimes by tracking their cab drivers through facial recognition. The report raises stark questions about corporate social responsibility and global data governance. Some of these surveillance and tech companies are empowering the ability of foreign autocrats to control their populations by building technology that would never be acceptable in their home jurisdictions. In Europe, thousands protested in Slovakia after the government moved to dismantle its whistleblower protection office and weaken anti-corruption laws. Steps critics say entrench the ability of bad actors to act with impunity. Rallies took place in 10 communities, including the capital, Bratislava, where the protesters at Freedom Square saw the assembled calling for the prime minister to resign. In another controversial step, Slovakia voted to ban the use of evidence gathered from the suspects who cooperated with law enforcement authorities in exchange for a lower sentence. And in Puerto Rico, journalists and civil liberties groups warn a newly signed law will slow access requests, expand secrecy, and weaken requests for privacy protections, reversing hard-won transparency reforms. A governor said the bill amends an existing law to provide more defined rules, avoid confusion, and reduce what she said was a considerable number of lawsuits. She also said it sets penalties for noncompliance. More than a dozen journalism organizations and civil rights groups have rejected the bill, noting that only one day of public hearings was held on short notice. With the new law, government agencies now have 20 business days instead of 10 to hand over documents, with fewer than 300 pages, or that were created less than 3 years ago. It would also allow the government to classify information as confidential without judicial review and eliminate personal privacy protections for those requesting information. We'll close with a condensed look at the Trump effect across U.S. institutions. A former NIH scientist is suing the administration, alleging she was illegally fired for warning that research cuts endangered patients, raising whistleblower retaliation concerns. Dr. Gian Marazzo filed a complaint alleging whistleblower retaliation with the U.S. Office of Special Counsel and publicly shared her concerns and was fired weeks later by Health Secretary Robert F. Kennedy Jr. The NIH has cut billions of dollars in research projects since President Donald Trump took office, bypassing the usual scientific funding process. The cuts included clinical trials testing treatments for cancer, brain diseases, and other health problems that a recent report said impacted over 74,000 people enrolled in the experiments. At the same time, the Justice Department is attempting to block a judge's contempt inquiry over deportations carried out in defiance of court orders, testing the balance of powers. The investigation took place for the failure to turn around planes carrying Venezuelan migrants to El Salvador in March. The department is also seeking Chief Judge James Boasberg removal from the case, accusing him of a radical, retaliatory, unconstitutional campaign against the Trump administration. The department asked the U.S. Court of Appeals for the District of Columbia Circuit to rule on its requests before Monday, when Boasberg is scheduled to hear testimony from a former government attorney who filed a whistleblower complaint. Longtime oversight proponent Senator Chuck Grassley now faces criticism for hypocrisy and failing to challenge the erosion of whistleblower protections he once helped build. In the past, Grassley developed a reputation for exposing corruption and waste, playing a key role in empowering inspectors general and internal watchdogs tasked with rooting out misconduct. However, lately he has been criticized for not going after the Trump government, and some whistleblowers have been reluctant to trust him with revelations that might harm the administration. President Trump has signed an executive order aimed at blocking state-level AI regulation, threatening federal funding to states that impose safeguards. Moves critics say hand unchecked power to big tech while sidelining democratic oversight. Colorado, California, Utah, and Texas have passed laws that set some rules for AI across the private sector, according to the International Association of Privacy Professionals. Those laws include limiting the collection of certain personal information and requiring more transparency from companies. Critics worry that banning state regulation would amount to a favor for big AI companies who have little oversight under the Trump administration. And finally, Trump issued a symbolic pardon for a former Colorado elections clerk convicted in a data breach case, reinforcing false election narratives while leaving state convictions untouched. Trump's pardon power does not extend to state crimes like those for which Peters was convicted last year and sentenced to 9 years in prison. Trump issued similar symbolic pardons last month for his former personal lawyer, Rudy Giuliani, his one-time chief of staff Mark Meadows, and dozens of others charged in state courts with backing his efforts to overturn the 2020 election. As always, we hope today's stories help you stay informed about the evolving landscape of privacy, access to information, and public accountability. Don't forget to follow the links in the show notes on Bill C-4. This is our final regular news summary of 2025. Over the coming weeks, we'll be releasing longer commentaries looking back on the year and ahead to 2026, featuring all the FIPA regulars, including Spencer Eisen, Ryan Rutley, FIPA President Mike Larson, and Executive Director Jason Moiwada. We'll be back with regular summaries on January 14th and 17th. To help keep the mics on, please consider subscribing to FIPA News Monitoring or making a donation. Our writer is Sean Fisk. Original music is by Breakmaster Cylinder. I'm Patrick Farnsworth, your host and producer. Thank you to all the reporters, outlets, and most importantly, you, our listeners, for making this work possible. Stay safe and stay informed.